This is the Theology Nerd podcast, and I'm Trip.
And I'm Nathan.
And this is where nerdy like theology things happen. That description was so concise and clear, people are now like, oh, that's what I'm listening to.
That's just, in case you didn't know. Accidentally downloaded.
Accidentally. And if you were accidentally downloading something and happened upon this episode, this is a special episode of a Theology Nerd podcast because it is the first Epiphanation. The first and hopefully not the last. Yeah, I don't know. It depends on what kind of feedback we get.
The bad thing about it is it only comes around once a year.
Well, I don't know. We can come up with another name.
Yeah.
Or just why can't we epiphanate more than one day a year?
See, now that has some interesting theological ramifications.
Because, there's that one song, I don't know who sang it, but it's about how it's always Christmas at my house. It's always Christmas, Christmas. It's always Christmas. Oh. It's always Christmas at my house. Christmas at my house. And
I don't know that one.
Oh, well, it exists, I promise. and maybe it's always Epiphany. When the Homebrewed Christianity community gets together for some Epiphanation. Nathan, maybe you should just tell how in the world we decided to do this.
Well, I don't know how we decided to do this.
I don't either,
but
it seemed like
it was decided. And the format is we had Homebrewed Community members sign up with some questions, topics, things they wanted to talk about. And then we were going to kind of go through them one by one and, add the member to the conversation live. People were watching live and there were some, beverages imbibed during this 3-hour span.
It's part of an epiphanating.
That's right. That's what makes it pop.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you may hear this and say to yourself, this is not a podcast that's over 3 hours. That's because
it was.
All of Epiphanation is not built for just your average consumption. Yeah. Some of Epiphanation is just for the elect, the members of the Homebrewed Christianity community. Now you can be a member. You go to homebrewedcommunity.com. You can become a member. You can get in part of the secret Facebook group. You'll get the little invites when we're going to do these things, and you can join in and ask your question. Now, today, the 3 different topics we're going to talk about is music and the arts and the role in the church and stuff. Then we're going to get a very nerdy conversation about John Cobb and Herman Daly's understanding of environment and the economy and process type stuff. And then we have a conversation about the relationship of biblical studies to systematic theology. Then those were in the first half of Epiphanation, but there's still like noticeable epiphanating collectively. Yeah. But some of the topics that you will miss as not having experienced live and things include a very intense rant about the superiority of West Coast IPAs to East Coast. Thoughts about the National Basketball Association. How much I can't stand Kevin Durant and why Westbrook is cooler, and basically that I just don't like Golden State, and not that anyone's surprised I'm a Laker fan, but what was some of the other stuff we're visited by the Godfather, and the Elder of Hops, who are members of the Homebrewed Community, one of which, if you're from Oklahoma, I'm sure this is normal, has a homemade moonshine. Because
going at it.
Why not? I guess if you're going to... They were snowed in. I feel like it was an excellent day. If you're snowed in at home, what a good day to have an Epiphanation.
I know, right? The best day.
But anyway, so it was a ton of fun, a real blast. And I'm looking forward to trying it again, assuming y'all enjoy it. Actually, I don't know. I'm going to do it again either way. That's what I'm saying.
That's right.
Because I at least know the people that got on did.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fun. So if you want to let us know what you think, you can go to homebrewedchristianity.com. If you want to be a member, homebrewedcommunity.com, and you can join the next Epiphanation. And if you can't join live, you can always just send in the topics.
Yep.
But at some point, we're going to do one so the Australians will be awake, because it's been requested.
It's going to require starting really early in the morning or really late at night.
I know. Well, I was just thinking, if you had breakfast stouts,
Yeah, that could work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind starting early.
No. I mean, okay. Jesus said, greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friend. And analogically, you could say that greater love hath no West Coast podcaster than he changeth his drinking and video talking time for a friend in Australia. Or New Zealand.
Yeah.
Or any people in that time zone. I'm just saying it was in Australia that requested it.
We can do that. We can make it happen.
Yeah, so, get ready.
See, these are the lengths we're willing to go for our community members.
Yeah. Like, normally I'm not thinking breakfast stouts on a reg. But it would mean that would be my carb day.
Yeah.
But you really fit in all your carbs.
Yeah, you'd get an early start.
You're like, screw burritos.
We're going to eat a
breakfast
stack of pancakes.
Oh, that's what we're going to do.
I'll bring a griddle. I'm just going to make pancakes the whole time.
That's game on. So here's what we're going to... The next one is going to be Australia friendly. And if you live in LA...
It's going to be Epiphanation Down Under.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Look, this is how the magic happens. People want to know...
Indian trips.
People said, Trip, y'all did Theology Beer Camp. At what point in the world did you decide that you were going to have a theological improv with a giant arrow-shaped whiteboard? You're going to have an IPA battle. You're going to do a late-night show, have a cornhole tournament where every team gets assigned a theologian name and all that stuff. And I was like, Nathan and I were hanging out. That's where it comes from.
We're recording podcasts.
Yeah, but this intro's keeping this junk in. You hear that, Manny? We're just trying to, it's like the Wizard of Oz. You find out what's behind the wire. It was just us talking.
Except this time, awesome.
The Australians inspired us, and we had to find a time before I have a baby, because honestly, with a newborn, Alicia's answer to "You're gonna what?" Well, we have Australian members. We're gonna get up early and have breakfast in my office and answer their questions. Really? Yeah. And what else are you gonna have, Trip? Honest reflection and community. So, Australians, you get ready. We're going to message y'all. And if you live in LA and want to just come in the office and griddle it up, then you let me know, because I'm optimistic.
And I make some badass pancakes.
I know. You're professionally trained to work the griddle.
This is true.
And can you omelet on a griddle?
Hell yeah.
Can you I don't know what else.
I can do anything.
Hash browns?
Oh, yeah. That's the only way to do it.
I know. I'm just saying. Look, we may even have to put jalapenos in it, because...
Let's do it.
Why not?
Game on.
That way, later that day, you won't be hungry because you ate plenty of breakfast. So, sorry for that excursus, but now we're going to Epiphanate, and thank you for listening. And you know what? Here's the thing. You can, especially if you're in Australia or in Los Angeles and want to have breakfast and Epiphany, go join the community. If you're like, Trip, I want to taste it, sample, and you live in LA, you just message us. You don't have to be a member of the community yet. You can have breakfast with us. And then after Epiphanation is when we'll tell them you should really join. Because we can't really scare them with hell.
No.
That would not be like the...
We'll just guilt them into it after.
Yeah. We're like, we gave you pancakes and beer. Don't you want to... All right. Enjoy. All right, Homebrewed Christianity community members. This is an experiment called Epiphanation. Why, you may say? Because today's Epiphany. For those that are liturgically informed, that is the day in which we celebrate that Gentile, pagan awareness that Jesus is indeed king, and Herod and Caesar are not. That is the Magi. The Magi, they epiphanated, and they were like, Herod's not the king. Caesar's not king. Little baby J. We don't need to ruin anyone's Christmas and, emphasize too much that on top of the Gospel of Matthew, probably creating these as theological narratives to introduce Jesus as recapitulating the Moses typology in the Gospels, and probably wasn't historical. And if it was, the baby Jesus was two-ish and at home and not at the manger. But that's an aside, unless that question comes up. Because Epiphanation is a community building experience in which different members of the community just bring up a question or a topic, and then they ask it. We talk about it for 10 minutes or whatever, and then we just go to the next one. And the goal is like that we come to an epiphanation together. The other half of it is I had this idea when one of the podcasts I listened to, Tim Ferriss podcast, he did an episode in which he recorded, he just called it drunk dialing, but he recorded episodes with listeners who all were like, oh, I want to ask you a question. And he just called them. And I thought that sounds fun, but why not do it on Zoom so people that are around for parts of the 3 hours can watch their friends and then join in. Maybe you have things on the chat. You're like, I want to speak back at this. Then you can join in. That's kind of the idea. Who knows how it goes? But since you are supporters of the podcast, you'll be able to give input, feedback, and such. And all the content's really going to be based on whatever it is you're talking about. So with that said, I'm going to be Del. Hope you're ready because you're about to become panelists because I know that you have something where you can't be here the whole time. So you're going to talk first. So buckle your safety belt. Don't worry. You're not the only one that had specific times. Some people are coming towards the end. Over the course of 3 hours, hopefully we'll have like 15 different people chat. All right. So Del is joining. So Del, first tell us who you are and introduce yourself before we find out what we're going to be epiphanating.
Yeah, sure. So by the way, I'm sorry I can't drink. I got to go into Boston tonight to watch my kids track meet. So
that seems like a legitimate reason.
Very legitimate. Yeah. Glad you appreciate it. So I'm a musician, a classical musician, a composer, conductor. Work at Wheaton College, but not the one you're thinking of. Teach at the one in Norton, Mass, which is a secular liberal arts school. And I've been doing work in all different kinds of work in music, sacred music, and worship arts, etc. for a long time. And I'm psyched to find out about Homebrewed Christianity because I'm discovering some theologians and some traditions that aren't really scared of the fine arts, since those tend to raise more questions than they answer. And that's kind of anathema to a lot of Christian traditions. I did teach in the evangelical world for 10 years, and I made my way, but eventually made my way out. So, again, it's ironic that I'm at the other Wheaton College. It's confusing, but
do they like that? Like, I feel like the other Wheaton really owns that URL in academic space. So are there like faculty jokes and stuff?
Well, we always get mistaken. But I actually work with some people on faculty there because, I'm a Christian and I write sacred music and I do stuff. But unfortunately, I feel really, really able to act professionally and open about my faith at my school. And I never really felt that way when I was actually teaching in the evangelical school. So I'm actually in a really good place.
Awesome.
And I was actually applying to both Wheatons at the same time. Actually, and I remember thinking, like, when someone said, "Hey, I talked to Wheaton. I talked to you about Wheaton," or I said, "Which one? Did you mention Jesus?" Because either way, I could have been screwed. Like, if they did mention or if they didn't. But this is the one I got, which I think was the will of God, ironically.
Well, the only other thing that would make this better is to find out that you're allergic to wheat.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're like, I don't eat bread.
Great. Yeah.
All right. So what's the question? What are we going to epiphanate on? And
well, I mean, I saw you with a guitar earlier, so I know you're not against the arts.
Not against it.
Yeah. No. So like, I've worked as a church musician and organist. I've also played worship bands, and but for 20 years, I pretty much only found that I'd be able to do music like in church services. Like when I've tried to use my talent, ability, whatever, in the service of the church, it's been mostly sort of narrow focus, right? Oh, sure, you could do this in the service, right? But I've gotten to know work of someone like Jeremy Begbie, who's a theologian at Duke, who is like the voice when it comes to music and theology. And then I know your friend Keith Perry here in Boston, who's been writing about theopoetics and how other kinds of languages can expand theological discourse. So this is a lot of this is new to me, and it's really exciting. But I'm learning from your perspective and maybe the perspective of other people who have been working in different kinds of churches. Where do you see, or how do you see the arts, or fine arts, if you will, or music specifically, playing a role in theological discourse now or in the future? And maybe at the same time, how might you see the postmodern church embracing the arts in a more broad way?
No, I mean, I think that's an important question. And I guess one of the things to say is like what it looks like in an individual congregation or an individual tradition in the church is probably pretty different. But one of the things I think that we could say broadly is that God made us co-creators, and what we create is not just ideas. We're embodied beings. We are speaking beings in the fullest sense, like communicating. Like your best communication is not when you do a math problem or take a true-false test. Your best communication is when you demonstrate through all sorts of different means, love, compassion, justice, this type of thing. And that human beings are in and of themselves artistic beings. All communications we have between each other begin by being part of a community that takes the body we have, the sounds we make, our materiality as a symbol, that we aren't just what's in front of us, that what's being communicated when we speak, when we sing, when we create is something that's more than the embodiment in front of you. We are not a species that simply has complete correspondence between what's said, created, and done and what's being communicated. We are a symbolic species. Our bodies are a concrete symbol of the self that each one of us has. And oftentimes when churches, for a bunch of different reasons, have feared the arts, they have flattened what communication means, what it means to be human, and we get a very reduced perspective. And then it creates, because of theology that kind of comes out of that context, it creates a phobia of art and communication and stuff like that. Now, one of the places I think it is really born is in the Protestant Reformation, that the Protestant Reformation included in its rejection of Catholicism, which is packed full of arts and basically art history for the first 1,500 years, when in CE is Catholic art history. So much of it is church history, sacred music, sacred art, and all these things. When Protestantism whitewashed the churches, got rid of icons and all this type of thing, when it simplified the music, those type of processes set up a whole host of Protestant traditions that saw the arts not as means to communicate the ineffable, to create a context or moment or experience in which that which could never be said directly is communicated or evoked. It turns all of them into means to get someone to an end, which is a spoken, strict correspondence, affirmation of whatever that denomination or church or whatever's truth beliefs are. When you think of that being the root and where the fear is, I think we can be more patient with people that go, well, you're an artist and now you're wanting use the gifts you have that God gave you and made you to be a part of worship or leading a community or helping us open up space to think and reflect on our faith. We can be patient because we can see where the history is. But as we start to think through postmodern context of church or where it's going, I think we have to go, we have a heritage and we can see what it's done. And now let us try to communicate the gospel, even one that's distinctively Protestant or whatever your tradition is. But let's do it in a robustly more beautiful way. Of all the different eternal virtues, one of them is beauty. One of them's truth. But truth is what we got hung up on and we miss out beauty. So I think art is a way of dealing more with teaching people that the registers in which the gospel can be communicated are much deeper than just spoken correspondence and logical. And the people that can lead us and help facilitate that are artists, because artists, they're like natives to that world. Some people freak out. They're like,
Well, why was I so moved by that? No one has even said the word Jesus yet, you know? Ooh. And so in one sense, I think the artists and people who create art knowing the history and have an identity as sacred artists can midwife an appreciation into these things back in the church.
I appreciate that. I wonder if I'm not connected to the world of seminaries or theological schools, even though I'm in Boston, I meet some people, right? But I wonder, how might it be possible for theology students, graduate students, PhD students, seminary students to start to connect more robustly with the arts through their training, because there's still very few people to be doing theology in the arts. And I know a lot of even the kind of music that ends up being used for worship services, like say it's Taizé, is very, very simple and it's powerful, right? But it's different from the classical tradition or lots of the music and the arts that's complex and difficult, intentionally so, because it deals with complex and ethical topics. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if structurally, do you see that maybe in the next couple of decades, more part of graduate training in theology will have to do with the arts, or how might that happen?
I mean, I know that at the seminaries and graduate divinity schools I've been a part of, the number of students in sacred art classes, the number of arts that get included, all those things are definitely growing. I know that theological aesthetics, and this is something Khaled could even talk about more. He's part of the the group in the academy that works on theological aesthetics, is a growing field, and a lot of it is frontier territory. But here's the thing I think academics and seminaries and stuff need to realize is the church has never been without artists. Just the church has lots of artists in it that don't know the very gifts they have are given by God and can be used to communicate beauty, truth, goodness, affirmation. They can be the ones that lead us to lament things we would never say directly, but we can evoke honestly. There's so many people that are part of the living body of Christ today who are gifted artists. And so as much as including them in curriculum and all that kind of stuff is important, I think the most thing would be like teaching awareness, comprehension, and of affirmation of artists, because every church has artists in it. And maybe the minister doesn't have to be an artist. If they are, obviously that's awesome. If they're a youth minister, they clearly need to know 6 chords to play on guitar. But I think the church is actually full of artists. And artists throughout the Western history, for most of it, have been funded, supported, affirmed, and really employees of religious communities. Now, their employees are advertisers in some sense. Either you're creating something that's funded to get people to give your attention so you can advertise to them separately, or they're literally creating art to get your attention, to compel you to be in desire for some product you don't need that'll help you get there. And that is such a completely drain, or at least my experience. I can't speak for all artists, but plenty of the ones I'm friends with here in LA find that as a draining experience, that you have a gift and a passion for something, and to do it professionally, if you're not, especially in an academic situation where you get to teach music appreciation class or whatever, you're making your money not to have solidarity with humans, to lift them up, to try to give voice to things. You're making your money trying to convince them that their life is inadequate as it is, and it needs something that can be fulfilled on an economic exchange. The church has the possibility of letting the artists exist in it do what most of them really want to do, which is tell the truth if they've come to know it from that slant of life, and do it in the context of a community of grace that wants to validate it. So in one sense, I feel like all the church leadership classes should have a lesson in it. Just like they say, hey, you need to know therapists in your area and counselors and the police and firefighters and health people so that you can refer. You're not all those people. Don't be it, or you're a bad minister. They should also say, you should know all the artists in your community and especially in your congregation, because your job's to empower them.
I like it. Discipleship for artists.
Yeah. And I would also say there are plenty of people, the churches, that want to start more artsy services or contemporary services, which means different music. And for some reason, a church that has an organ is cool spending 20% of its income on that one service, but then spending $200 a week on the other and doesn't know why it doesn't grow and doesn't do well. Like, good music, even if it's a pop song, still requires spending money or having very talented people to do it that volunteer their time, but normally get paid.
Yeah.
Like good to do art well is a craft. And I'm sure you can have an authentic moment at a campfire with someone that can't hold a tune or even know how to tune their guitar. But the number of failed contemporary services or art facilitated services that failed because that service got like 1/40th the amount of money their service with the same people that give all the time, go all the time, and expect nothing else, except they have paid singers in the place, they have $1 million organ, all kinds of stuff. And so part of that affirmation of art also means congregations, when they want to do something, the best way to affirm an artist is to affirm them, not to like ask for you to be their freebie.
Yeah.
And you know, I understand like church budgets and getting scared and stuff, but if you were in a room at the beginning of the year and you were like doing a budget from zero and you have 2 worship services and one of them is more likely to have new members and one of them is full of longtime members that we hope are more mature disciples, you could at least justify spending equal amounts on the artist in both services. But that's not how it works. But it's because they don't see art as a ministerial gifted vocation. And that's theologically problematic, regardless if you're an artist or not.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that artists can really offer is the fact that, you know, like when it comes to being creators, we a lot of times we create just to create and because we enjoy doing it, which is theologically pretty close to the to Genesis 1, you know? And there's not many people in the world that have the luxury to just do something because they love it and not instrumental, no pun intended, right? To make something else happen. And I think you're just studying music as a kind of human creation that represents a little window into how God might think, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think that could, personally, I think that could be very interesting for people learning how to be pastors, rather than just seeing, here's how to use music to get more butts in the seats or how to make everyone really excited, you know, as an end in and of itself, you know. I just don't know if that happens, if that's an approach people take in seminary or whatever.
Yeah. So here's the thing you may not know yet. Nathan has a master's in music before coming to the hatchery to be a student. So Nathan's going to say something while I refill my drink. And then for those of you that are on the side, if you're not ready for me to call one of you up, you should say so now, because I'm just going to pick somebody. And Nathan, go for it.
Hey, Del.
Hey.
Yeah, so I have went to undergrad in oboe performance and then got my master's in music theory and composition. So,
oh, no way. All right.
I'm very familiar with this world. I was a church musician for too many years to count. So I know I'm right there with you. There's a couple of things that came to my mind immediately, and especially if you're in the Boston area. Are you familiar with shape note singing at all?
Oh, sure, yeah.
You ever gone to any of those?
I have never gone to one of those events, no.
I highly, highly recommend you. I think that should be the first thing that you do when trying to think about how to incorporate this in some sort of theological, educational way, because the experience of that is really unlike anything else that, as a musician, professionally, classically trained, that I've ever been a part of, because it's not about the performance. You know what I mean? It's not about the quality of the singers. It's not about how many times you practice. It's not about, you're not even performing for an audience. I mean, It's for the people who were there. So I really think that you should there are a ton of shape note communities in the Boston area. I've been to a few of the singings up in Connecticut and in Massachusetts, and it's really, really an incredible experience. And I really think you should do that. And actually, the Episcopal church I worked at in Ohio, we actually did a couple shape note services. So all of the normal music that you would have throughout through the service was shape note tunes. We had the choir help participate, and we had the congregation. They all sung as well. And I mean, it's meant to be sung by normal folk who are untrained. Yeah. And so we can talk more about that at some point too. I've got a lot of ideas about that. The other thing that I thought of, and maybe Tripp will have some more to say now after he hears this, but I think I might have told him this before. One of the last classes I took was a world music class, an ethnomusicology class. And the teacher was from China, and he had done a lot of research in Hungary, believe it or not. Apparently there's some tribal connection. There's some group in China that is like ethnically related to some people in Hungary or something like that. Anyway, he was doing some, ethnomusicological things and like walking around with the sound recorder, just like recording different people singing and stuff, like they do. And he came across this farmer who was singing. And so he walks up to him and he says, "Can I record your music?" And speaking in Hungarian. And the guy looked really confused. He didn't understand what he was asking. In this conversation, this miscommunication went on for quite a long time. Like, "I'm just trying to record you singing. Like, is that okay? Can I do this?" The guy didn't understand what he was talking about. Come to find out, the guy misunderstood what he was asking because he was singing to his animals. And he didn't consider that music. That wasn't music. So that he had like sort of these three distinctions. Like, I'm singing to my animals to help them, to make them do something. I sing to fellow humans. That's music. And then I sing to God. That's all. But that's not music. The only thing that specific village considered music was the transmission to human to human contact. That was what music was. But when I'm singing to God or when I'm singing to my animals, that's not music. It's a totally different mode. It's not the same thing. So I don't know. I thought that popped into my head. It epiphanated into me.
Yeah.
While you guys are talking. So I don't know
cool story.
What you have to do, what you're going to do with that trip.
I don't know. I'm going to let it ferment because we're already 30 minutes in. We have to talk to everybody.
We do.
But Del, thank you for sharing, talking, and hopping on early. I hope you enjoy going across the city of Boston. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Now, let's see. Jesse. We can hear you now, Jesse. We are ready, willing, and possibly able to epiphanate. So tell us where you are, and then we can epiphanate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm right now in Minneapolis, Minnesota, just outside of the city, actually in the burbs. Hanging out here at my folks' place before I'm going to return to New York, which is where I'm studying sustainable development in school.
Where are you studying?
What am I studying?
Or what school are you at?
I'm at Columbia University. It's in Manhattan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I only know people in their religion department, but
out at school. Just to give a quick word about myself, I'm a jazz drummer, involved in a fairly typical student kind of campus ministry, as well as a group called the Veritas Forum, which does a bunch of fun, good stuff. So. Yeah. And you're the one who has read Cobb and Herman Daly's work on green economy stuff. Yeah, so I've actually just been getting into the stuff they've done together. Fascinatingly, long story short, life has led me to get very into theology over the last 8-9 months. And from you guys at Homebrewed hearing about John Cobb for the first time, he actually showed up in a couple footnotes in my economics class this last semester, along with Whitehead, actually.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, so that was actually felt very providential, actually. So good stuff all around.
So tell me what are you wanting to talk Epiphanate and such about? Also, I should just tell everyone, Nathan said that you were like, oh, well, can you help Fortress or whoever figure out how to get group purchasing of my book? I am in full support of group purchasing of the book, and people group purchase. I'll do whatever you want. You can have all your friends that read the book get together. I'll Skype in and answer questions. I'll talk about it. I'll do whatever. Like I have a zero problem proselytizing for myself. So just make sure you email me afterwards if you've heard back or not heard back from Fortress. Then I'll annoy them.
Yeah.
Anyone else that's interested, if your group is going to read my book, and you're not going to just photocopy it for everybody. I always just say that, but then I'm totally down to show up, help, and lure them to give group discounts.
Sure. So funny thing is, when I talked with Fortress, because we kind of do this like semesterly book giveaway through the ministry I'm in, and the discount that Fortress was going to give was significant, but actually still the price was more expensive than it was on Amazon.
It's okay. Amazon's cheaper for me. I wrote it.
That's hilarious. So no, but
maybe. It might be hilarious.
So the funny thing is like 250 copies of your book. It took about I think almost 4 weeks via a dozen different shipments of the book to get to the ministry leader's apartment in New York.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
well, however it works, I don't want to discourage it, but if people are reading it or whatever, y'all want to get together, I'm glad to Skype in and cooperate with whatever makes you look good to your superiors.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I'll just be like, look, Jesse Thorson's one of the premier young scholars of eco philosophy, science, and religious reflection. It's just an honor to be here.
Great. Appreciate it. So yeah, one thing that as I've been going through Herman Daly and Cobb's book called For the Common Good, right away in the introduction, they note how classical economics, the kind of key axiom is personal utility maximizing behavior, and economics just normalizes that entirely. And then they connected that to the Reformed tradition following Augustine of just fallen human fallenness, effectively. And then here's the quote that I wanted to know if you just wanted to riff off of or see what you have. They write that economic theory differed from Calvinism only in celebrating as rational what Calvinists confessed as sinful. So what's problematic for that, for us Christians, when the kind of core logic of how we operate is utility maximizing? What's problematic when I think about my relationship to the family across the street in the burbs as in that framework?
So, one thing I would just say is, if people haven't read For the Common Good, here it is. If you're on the video, if you're not, you should check it out. Also, Cobb has a shorter version. I think it's Sustainable Economy or something like that.
That sounds right.
Sustaining the Common Good,
which is a much more you don't have to know math and Hyatt's and Adam Smith and all that kind of stuff to follow the whole thing. But before answering a question, one of the two of the big ideas that come out of this that kind of frame where they're going is one is that the baseline economic theories for capitalism as we have it have variables for labor, variables for value, variables for production. What it does not have as a variable, and variable for resources, but what it doesn't have is a variable for the consequences of the appropriation of natural resources, right? So you can assess resources in capitalism by what's available. Oh, there's oil here, or there's lumber here. Well, if we take it down and we don't replenish it, we won't have enough to do what? Insert it in the system. What they kind of point out is that the theory itself does not have a variable for what if nothing you're tracking has an output that is utterly destructive to large portions of what you are paying attention to? I don't know. Let's say that carbon emissions get to a point that then you have large desertification in Africa and poor people who don't have the benefits of global capitalism are now losing the ability to feed themselves working and that kind of thing. So they say like the financial, relational life network that is being diminished because of global capitalism and out of the effects of to the environment, that's not being assessed, and it's problematic for everyone that's being affected by, which happens to be the people that are not gaining the most by our current system. So who is it in Los Angeles that has like China level children with asthma? Surprisingly, it's poor people of color who live in the middle where no white people of privilege live, that drive by as they go between their beach city living and their industrial job or their industry film job. All the people that live in the middle, where all the CO2 comes out as we drive for an hour or so both ways each day, their children have really high asthma rates. Do the people that drive by pay for their health insurance? Do we compensate them for the shorter life expectancy? No, it's not in the factoring. So the ethical side for the common good is, does our economic relationship to our community and our environment breed a sustainable connectivity? And you may go, well, what are you, a hippie, asking these questions? They go, no, we're just telling you that before anyone knew the science, Adam Smith and friends argued that capitalism did this. That if you did it well, it was good for everyone, short of lazy fools that don't work or someone so sick or helpless they need help, and obviously we'll help them because Jesus loves them. And the assumption of capitalism at its heart was this is the best system to help the disenfranchised. And then they point out, no, because it doesn't have a variable for something they didn't know then, we know now. So one sense, it's a critique. In another sense, it's going, how do we organize in a way that recognizes all the variables that are at play? The relationships that we're looking at are not primarily a relationship between those who own the capital, means of production, and labor, and then the customer and the one that is doing the selling. There's actually no way, because of the environment and the way economics works, to isolate those relations and make those ethical, because the whole system itself is interconnected. That's very processed. The other half of what the book is arguing ethically is that capitalism works well for the poor and oppressed when you have growth. Now, there's lots of reasons we have growth and it doesn't. But in theory, as the pie gets bigger, capitalist-friendly arguments will go, then even if you only have 3% of the pie, that part got bigger, and they'll say, so people on welfare in the United States have flat-screen TVs. That's nice. But what they're pointing out is, for it to work, it has to have constant growth.
Right.
Now, if you have constant growth, and the logic of it doesn't include environmental degradation, the outputs of it, and the fact that we now have too many people on the planet to sustain our levels of consumption, and we need those consumption patterns to grow in order for the economy to grow, you're in what is called a pickle. They think Cobb and Herman Daly, and they both won like political and economic theory awards for this book. Herman Daly's like a legit famous, right? He's a real economist. John Cobb, he has initials JC, and has won books of science, economy, philosophy, religion. Like the only theologian who's like in like the American Scholars of whatever, I forgot what it's called because I'm epiphanating.
Cheers. Water.
Well, you're an undergrad. But so those two thoughts are important to get. Then they go, and this is like straight up Cobb at work, but people like Charles Taylor, we were reading Secular Age this year at the Hatchery. Other theorists have pointed this out, that when Protestantism comes into effect and you demolish the difference between sacred and secular vocations, right? So it used to be like, they're chaste and impoverished or whatever, and we have our vocation. We're in this nice ordered society in a feudal system, and we all got our role to play. We play the role. We have meaning and purpose. you take out the system, you take out the distinction between sacred and secular vocations, and all of a sudden you got Protestants, Martin Luther starts it, saying like, oh, priest of the believer. Then it gets to Calvin, and he's like, don't you want to be a member of the elect? We need to have a church that's pure, only elect one. We're going to set up Geneva. When people are asking me, I'm sorry, my name's John Calvin. They want to know if I'm a member of the elect. And the best way is to see signs of your election. What might they look like? I don't know. Every vocation is a holy vocation. So what would God signal your election based on your vocation? Well, clearly you should be committed to your vocation as you are committed to God. That's one sign. And you'll be reaping the fruits of your election because of that. And you get this Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
Now, what page is the quote that you were on?
I might have a different version than you, okay. But it's on... It's actually right in the introduction. It's on my page 5.
Oh, well, that's super early.
5-6.
Well, now I can't see it. So anyway, it's in the introduction if you're following around or have the Cobb book around. But the argument that they're wanting to point out is that what we call working hard, playing by the rules, and everyone starts from a fair place, and you can succeed if you do it. It was originally a theological statement about discipleship for people in the Reformed tradition. Do you want to look like one of the elected, redeemed people? Then you're going to be a good citizen. You're going to be a good worker. And if you do these things, the church, the nation state, and the economy will bless you as God intends you to be blessed. Now, honestly, like it worked really well for things for a long time. I took a class once with Robert Clitgard, who was worked for the World Bank on development in other nations, and I was an interdisciplinary PhD seminar. I was the only philosophy of religion PhD seminar person in there, so I was like their token person who had actually read Marx and Adam Smith, because most of them don't read it; they just have feelings about it. And when we got to the ambassador of Pakistan Skyped in, and they have this conversation about the development plan for Haiti. And the Pakistan guy goes, it just, one of the things I've always been disappointed is the inability to get Reformed tradition missionaries in there.
Wow.
And I'm like,
what?
If you're going to introduce them to Jesus, don't teach them a Calvinist, and he goes on, and then after it, I get in this conversation with Robert, and Robert says, or Dr. Clitgard, but anyway, he says, statistically, the Reformed tradition is the best avenue for getting people to organize their own and family and community well-being towards expanding markets. And it was at that point that sentence you pointed out started to make sense. And if the assumption is the world as it is, like the big framing structures, nation states, global capitalism, some type of representative democracies, if those structures are just assumed, then you have these components that were built at those things' emergence that we can then teach, embody. We're expanding liberty, justice, success, faith, all these things. What I think Daly and Cobb are pointing out is that we've gotten to a point where that doesn't work anymore. Like, we know it doesn't work because the theory itself has these big holes we just talked about. But also, you're introducing people into a system, and the people that are introducing it to them have bought in, even if they don't believe in God anymore, because they've internalized the theory of human beings that Calvin had, which is that you as an individual are either, reprobate or elect. But the important part, the main feature, is that you are you are depraved. And the depravity you have to bowl with liners in if you're depraved. You need the little gutter blockers. And gutter blockers, like a good vocation in a nice rail-run Geneva and stuff like this, are good because human beings are selfish pricks and destructive. And the best way to get them in is get them a good job in a good community, get them at a good church, like this type of stuff.
Right.
And they're like, what if the problem is that so much of the system's built on a picture of what it means to be human? And the assumption is depraved people win when they win at this system. Now we know this system's output is destruction of the poor and the planet. Do you really think the best way to deal with depraved people is to put them in something that when you succeed, you are the active agent of violence towards people you're connected to, unaware of, and unresponsible to, because you have individualistic Protestant Reformed blinders?
Right. What comes to mind also, and this...
I'm sorry that was a long rant, but...
No, that's great. And this might be a little bit of a stretch, but like riffing off of the Protestant work ethic and the kind of obsession of what seems to be like giving to each his or her own, and like being okay with those who does not get that, like being okay with that. It seems like that also could be like connected fairly closely with like penal substitutionary atonement theories. Like it's the exact same thing where this is how it is, and when you are like you get your own, and it's like this obsession with telling other people you don't have anything to your own.
Yeah.
Do you follow that at all? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. Your initial assessment of your own being in a capitalist society is you have a space and possibly a slightly deficient public education but you have a little cock, but don't worry. We're all working with very different ideologies to give you the possibility that if you kick butt, you can have the American dream and move up or whatever. But the narrative, right, is you as an individual. Like success in the narrative, and it's gotten worse now than it has been before. And I think part of that's connected to partisanship and all sorts of things. But now, like the story we tell ourselves is an individualistic one. Success politically and stuff is an individualistic one. Like we succeed by helping individuals have the opportunities before them. And if you notice, even both parties, most of the time they discuss support. It's support for what? The middle class. And the middle class is something more people believe they're in than they're really in. And it's people who think their kids can do better than them if they both work hard. And but the assumption under that dream is everybody has to be like all on board, totally, gung-ho, working hard and all that kind of stuff around it. And I think penal substitutionary atonement is similar in that once you are told the story, you are at a deficit and there are expectations upon you. And now, theoretically, right, like Jesus paid it all or whatever. But once you get done crying and baptized, then they start telling you about accountability partners, righteousness training, all sorts of other things. Because the assumption is no matter what you've attained, you're in a deficit. God demands more. No matter where you've given, where you've arrived at, whatever, the market demands more. It's the demand of more for you that is connected to your status as an individual, either holy or successful, that's problematic. That's where I would kind of identify the connection. And it is a perverse form of Protestantism. Like Luther thought that the Protestant insight was that you are God's beloved and that's the most true thing about you. Mm-hmm. That if someone says less, be it someone on behalf of God or your job, then they're lying. It's just not true, because nobody is in the position like the God who knows you completely, loves you completely, and made you to tell you something more true about you than God. And God said, in Christ, you are my beloved. So I totally see that connection, but especially working with students, I bet it's, you see it show up and it gets really, students are wrestling with religious and social, political narratives all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And they are that intertwined. And I think a lot of us, when I was a campus minister, I noticed it couldn't differentiate, or especially if you weren't aware of the religious narratives anymore, you didn't see how much they operated on you. And I think that's one of the insights that, like, the Daly Cobb quote kind of points out is that, no, like Calvin can still ruin your life even if you don't know about it.
Yeah. I see it as like just really elevating like this fear of giving people stuff that they don't deserve, which is like ironically kind of the heart of Jesus for everybody. But like with certain understandings of the cross, etc., you really hang on to the idea that, well, these people don't deserve it and they won't get it. And then that works into like the capitalist work ethic, which is you don't work, you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was fun. Make sure you email me. So if I can connect with your group, that'd be great. And Jay, if you're, just say no now, or I'm going to add you.
How you doing?
You need to dress up for us.
Oh, I didn't get that memo. Sorry, I had a funeral today.
So Jay, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
I'm calling from sunny northern Ohio right now, just outside Cleveland a little ways, and I'm a funeral director here in Ohio. And what else?
We're at in Ohio.
Wellington. Do you know where Oberlin is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm about 8 miles south of Oberlin.
Oh, awesome! I grew up in Youngstown.
Okay.
So I lived in Lakewood on the west side of Cleveland. Worked in Lorraine at some points. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but awesome. Do you now? I saw on your question there that it was sort of open ended, but you mentioned some difference between theology and biblical studies.
Yeah. Before I came back to work with my family, I was a religion major, went to seminary, and was more of a biblical studies major. And so there's a lot of variation between the theology and the biblical studies. And it's just been interesting as I've through the epic reads and so forth engaged with the theology. I just have this tendency where I slip back into the biblical studies. Even, Tripp started out earlier today, and he did a thing that I love to do. As he's talking about Epiphany, he's like, well, not to ruin Christmas for you, but, talking about how it's a creation of Matthew, to talk about how Jesus is the Moses character. And that's something that I'm constantly doing and in my reading, and so there's just this very big difference. I remember listening to an interview with John Cobb that Tripp did, where he said, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I worked with a biblical scholar on this part, and that difference between the two is really, really kind of fascinating. So I just kind of wanted to see what he had to say about that, or any conversations he wanted to have around that.
Didn't you want to do New Testament studies or something like that originally?
Yeah. I'm dyslexic. One of the problems of being dyslexic is not being good at foreign languages, which significantly impacts being a professional scholar of texts that are, not written in English.
Right. It does make it hard. I did a couple years of Greek and really loved that, but and I've read more Bart Ehrman than anybody should really. So like when we read Moltmann, I remember, he's focusing in on this, the cry dereliction. I kept saying in my head, like, well, he probably didn't really say that. And I think Moltmann addressed that at some point, said, well, I understand biblical criticism would say this isn't actually what he said, but maybe something close to that. So I've always got that in the back of my head as I go through and read these more theological treatments of something.
Well, I think one of the things to think about is that one of the differences between biblical studies today in biblical studies previously is the recognition that the biblical texts are theological texts by a plurality of authors, that they represent a multiplicity of voices about theological questions and that kind of thing. And but the other side of it is to recognize that today when we talk about biblical studies, it is a discipline that's part of a university system that's not inherently theological. And one of the things that's helpful for that is they point out that what they're working with are theological texts. It used to be early on that the Gospels, and then were taken. You had this historical Jesus thing, and you had critical studies of the New Testament, and the assumption was that you were going to get back to something, right? They work with sources and that kind of thing. And now we're kind of at a point where biblical studies people realize, regardless of all the new information we've gained, like text, Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran, and all that kind of thing, 98% of what we have to work with when we work with stuff about Jesus are texts where all of them, with very different Christologies, all thought Jesus was the Messiah. And that's why they wrote it. And then what they wrote were theological narratives that include history stuff, and it includes theological narratives. It includes connections with contemporary understandings of biblical texts we may or may not even be aware of. It contains plays with narratives that were available in other religious political narratives and stuff like that, that we're becoming more and more aware that what we are engaging when we read the Bible are theological texts and not just either kind of avenues to the history or a unified document to build systematic theology on. Like in the New Testament, you have 13 or so different theologians contributing. The other side of it, when you realize that, is that the biblical studies helps us actually give empowered voices back to the plurality and diversity of voices in the early church. So as a theologian, I found that is one of the greatest things about biblical studies, is that we're at a point now where you can think, like, what would Matthew say? Not that like you know it completely, but you do know he thinks something different than whoever wrote John or Luke or Mark. Right. And you also know that those names are attributed to texts that probably are not the person that wrote it. But and so to me, or at least existentially, my experience has been, the more I've learned about biblical studies, the more in recognizing them as theological documents, the more I've realized as a theologian that we're in an ongoing shared tradition, or the history of the church is the ongoing living body of Christ, people and communities who experience God as mediated by Jesus, attempting to explain why that happened. The Gospels are accounts, Paul's account, but the church has constantly done it. And so the gift of biblical studies for theologians, I think, is a constant awareness that you can't have a Christian theology, because canon has multiple. And canon, if you pay attention to biblical studies, is a composite of a whole bunch of other sources we may not even ever have access to. And they're all connected to a bunch of people that, for very different reasons, are making these type of affirmations about Jesus. Their affirmations aren't the same. Their stories of Jesus aren't the same, but nonetheless, they're all in our scriptures, because what we are connected to isn't a finalized text or a finalized theology. It's the living experience as a member of the body of Christ. And so, like, in a sense, Bart Ehrman is more helpful for me as a theologian than a New Testament scholar who wants to sneak Karl Barth and the Cappadocians into their exegesis of Romans. So like when someone's like, oh, secretly we found out that Paul's a Trinitarian. And you're like, but I think that tendency is connected to people that want there to be some closed account of theology. And so we need no longer we have an inerrant Bible where it's all dictated by God. Well, at least they should all agree about the Trinity, or all agree about whatever. And we're like, no, biblical study says no. And theologians are totally down. And I think it's important today. We should be totally down for insisting that if in the early church There was a plurality and diversity that could not be unified, and yet it was canonized as representative of the living body of Christ's testimony about God. Then the same should be true today. And today there are a whole lot of people, not just literate men, who are speaking, confessing, and describing what it means to be a Christian, to have faith, and their voices should be treated with the dignity that we should treat Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, who none of them are Trinitarians and they have different Christologies. So, but I think like those ideas are totally connected to my, assuming I wasn't dyslexic, I probably would have done New Testament because regardless of being a liberal Protestant, I'm not really good at not reading the Bible every day. So, anyway.
That's good.
And plus, my thought is you could write Karl Barth wrote a lot. There are a lot of people who know who Karl Barth is. Very few of them have read much of it. And in 1,000 years, he'll be a footnote in a history of theology book, but everyone will still read the Gospel of Matthew. So, like, as much as we like to give crap to different things or whatever, the texts keep hanging around. So,
I went through this part, this time where I constantly was like demythologizing everything, I guess, to use Bultmann's term, and just felt like I was throwing everything out too. And I think the theology, reading more of the theology has helped me not to do that as much, because that was really a tendency when I was more into the biblical studies, when I was reading more of the biblical scholars as opposed to the theologians. It was like I was constantly throwing things out of Scripture, saying, well, they didn't really say that, or that wasn't really written by Paul, or, this wasn't that, and it really kind of diminished my experience of Scripture for a period of time until I was able to regain that theological insight into it also. And I didn't notice how different the two disciplines were until I was at AAR in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I went with you to listen to Bultmann, and then we went to the open and relational thing, and I strained. It was difficult to follow. And then I decided to go to an SBL conference, and I was listening to Dick Horsley and a couple others, and I was like, oh yes, I totally get this. They're talking my language. And just totally different disciplines. And that I knew they were different, but that really caught me off guard, how different within the realm of Christian scholarship, how different those disciplines are.
Oh, yeah, definitely different. And the other part about it not just being different is how few in one have awareness of what the other one's doing.
Yes.
One of the coolest parts of the podcast is getting to talk to people in different ones. Mm-hmm. And I think it's helpful because the academy, you succeed by getting more and more narrow so that you finally figure out a niche that you're the only living person that's the best at it.
Right.
And everyone knows it and goes, well, that is a legitimate area. And so it really doesn't encourage kind of interdisciplinary religious reflection. So, I mean, it's totally different. And yeah, but what's fun about it is, like, short of like the biblical studies person being like a committed, really conservative Christian or a militant atheist or something like that, biblical studies is great for freaking out theologians, not just because it means they might have to read the Bible, but because so much of theology in every generation age, prior to the kind of advent of contemporary biblical studies, they assumed that the church's ongoing interpretation of the text was connected to its origin. And then every 30, 40 years, there's a new historical Jesus, a new Paul, a new whatever. And they're like, all the theologians are like, I can't read all this. I just read the summary books from the Jesus Seminar in Brueggemann. Now I'm going to write my theology. And you just footnote that. And then, 30 years later, you have the systematic theology that some kids write a dissertation going on. Well, 3/4 of this book is inadequate because we no longer recognize blah, 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 blah about apocalypticism and Jesus, but this part's good, blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on. So the theologians who are aware of both sides and the biblical scholars that understand theologians are some of the coolest people, I just think, because both of them speak softer about their conclusions, but they also tend to be people who have more confidence in their own faith because their faith is not kind of nested in some conclusions, guild, affirmation system. It's kind of connected to them working it out themselves in a much kind of deeper, richer conversation.
But I see that in Brueggemann. He seems to kind of move between the two a little more, effortlessly, and seems to have a better grasp in both areas. Oh yeah.
Well, thank you, Jay, for joining, and thank you for bringing cigars when we met.
You're welcome.
All right, Nathan, you want to say anything?
I think that was a successful first Epiphanation.
Well done, dear listener. You made it through a very special episode, and now we're going to tell you some ways we can connect. And obviously, the easiest way is just to go to homebrewedchristianity.com. You can find out all sorts of things there, like where events are, where classes are happening, and that kind of stuff. If you want to be super, super amazeballs, you can be a member of the Homebrewed Community. Go to homebrewedcommunity.com. Then you'll find out everything all the time. Be in our secret Facebook group. Always be a part of all the classes, and get to have input and shape special Theology Nerd episodes. But here's the thing. If you aren't a member and want to join the class for the questions for the believing skeptic, you can do that. Because over February, the class is going on with Barry Taylor and I. After that, you'll probably be able to get the videos, purchase those junks on the website. And yeah. So what else is happening?
I think you're going to Cincinnati, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to Cincinnati. And it's in February.
February 10th and 11th.
On the 10th, I'm going to be hanging out with Adam Clark. And we're going to be doing some theologizing right there in Cincinnati together. Adam is a theologian who is writing the Homebrewed Guide to Salvation. He was out here for beer camp, and now we're gonna get to hang out in Cincinnati, which is like your home state.
Home state, other end, but it counts.
Well, the other end of Ohio is closer than the other end of California.
This is true. That is very true.
That's an important fact, dear listeners.
California is a lot longer than you think it is.
It is. Have I ever told you?
Yes, you have.
Okay. So, love you, Gregory. We said, it's only 2 hours into the other state. And we drove. That was also the day I realized I did not have any cruise control when you begin a 17.5-hour drive.
I've been there.
Yeah. It's no fun. Yeah. But you know what really is fun? Progressive Youth Ministry this year in North Carolina. It's going to be at Montreat, which I'm pretty excited about. One, because it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. The other is because that means everybody's not at different hotels, so there's no reason not to hang out until late into the evening. Mm-hmm. We're going to do a live podcast. Aaron Simmons is going to be on the podcast, who, if you remember the End of Religion episodes of the podcast, he was a part of that. And I'm doing a pregame on the 7th of March. The event's the 8th, the 10th, and it's a Theology Nerd boot camp. Ashes, angst, and ancestors. That's right. I'm going to be talking about the 3 biggest burdens adolescence throws on us. Knowing you're going to die, the struggle for identity, and all the unseen ways your parents screw you up. We're going to talk about those 3 things and what it's like to think about them theologically, to help students do so, how to lead and process in that situation, and maybe in the same time. See, this is the trick of high quality teaching, is they think they're learning about adolescence, but it's really time for us as a community for self-discovery.
Kumbaya.
Yeah. It's more subtle as opposed to a direct way for self-discovery this August in Germany.
You are like the king of segues.
Oh, this August we are doing a spiritual pilgrimage on the 500th anniversary of the Reformation in Germany in the footsteps of Luther. That was you like that?
I like that. It was very dramatic.
This August, we shall travel the footsteps of Luther, reflecting on faith. Questions that provoke anxiety. Drink delicious German beer and look towards the future. The next 500 years. That was my German hum.
That was pretty good.
I mean, it wasn't a German accent.
No, not at all. But it was good.
Yeah. So
I'm convinced.
If you want to, go to Germany, travel, know Luther, experience it, think about it, and really, not end the month of August thinking you failed as a human.
Why do you like Luther so much, Trev?
Why?
Yeah, why?
Why? Because Luther was someone who realized that a lot of what happens religiously becomes oppressive if the foundational blocks aren't made clear. And Luther was a theologian who, in his time, through his critique and pushback to parts of the Catholic Church, brought to the fore that at the heart of faith is God's full affirmation of our complete being and self. And that the most true thing about you is that you're God's beloved. And that faith is trusting that God's word about you is true and not what you say, what you think, what your parents have said about you, and all that kind of stuff. It's the heart of the gospel. Luther discovered it. It shaped things. There are also plenty of things you can learn from Luther not to do. Like anti-Semitism. I'm against it.
Mm-hmm. Suffocating children.
That's something you shouldn't do. Or blaming Satan because you have serious bowel issues from eating just meat, cheese, and large amounts of beer.
Which we will be doing in the spiritual pilgrimage.
Yeah, but it's not like you have to do it all the time.
Not all the time.
Yeah. So there you go. If you want to know more about it,
you make me want to love Luther even more now.
That's what I like to hear. If you want to know more about it, you can go to the website homebrewedchristianity.com. You can text the word Luther to 44222. 44222.
That's 44222.
I know. It gets really confusing. Just like all the fours and twos, how many of which one, it gets overwhelming. So then you should just go to the website. And so any questions about any of this, let me know. If you're going to be in Cincinnati and want to hang out, then holla. Twitter's the best way to find me. But until then, keep it fresh.